Welcome everybody and all our online friends. Thanks for joining us. For those that are watching from like other geographic locations today, you get to witness something very special. It's the sudden and very abrupt end to short season. And with that, up here in the mountains, we begin generator season.
Yeah.
Woo! I'm just so glad they didn't turn it off yet. That we get to come in here and do this and have lights and the whole 9 yards. It's like downright civilized up in here. Well, we're going to continue our study of John today, the Gospel of John. We're starting a new chapter. Now, last week, my wife totally set me straight on this. I likened this Gospel of John portion to the Peter Pan ride, where you get in and, kind of takes you around, Disneyland and shows you the different things about Peter Pan. It's like, you're around this, and pretty soon, oh yeah, look, we're up in the air, there's the Tower of London, and it's so cool. And she's like, isn't the Peter Pan ride? This is more like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. So I'm going to make that correction this morning. We're cruising along, and oh, there's that, quick turn, and oh, there's fire, we're in hell, oh, hey, this is probably more like that, not the like nice, gentle Peter Pan thing. But it is kind of John just kind of carries us along. He doesn't give us all the details because, he's painting a picture of the character, the identity of Jesus. And so he just kind of carries us through. He shows us certain things and certain scenes, and he's painting this picture as he goes along. So we're just kind of, strap in, because Mr. Toad's Wild Ride happens rather abruptly and quickly, and that's what we're doing today. So last week, and Jesus is before Pilate. He is being tried. He's being falsely accused. He's being tried. Last week he appeared before Pilate, who was procurator of Rome. He was like a high honcho who was in town for the Passover because he's trying to keep the peace. The Jewish leadership could not execute people. That was taken away from them by Rome. They needed Pilate to sign on to get an execution ordered for Jesus. And so Pilate takes Jesus inside. And we talked about how the Jewish leaders, they showed up, and they are so high and mighty and religious that they won't go in the palace of Pilate because he's a Gentile. And they wanted to eat the Passover. It's like, oh, we'll get too dirty going in there. So they made Pilate come out to them. And Jesus, even though he was cuffed, was taken in to the palace of Pilate. He did not seem bothered by being in a Gentile building. Jesus is like, oh no, I'm a holy man. I'm going to lose my holiness by being here with a Gentile in a Gentile palace. He wasn't worried about that. In fact, he opened up a dialogue kind of with Pilate. I think his heart was for Pilate. His heart's for all of us. Anybody that will turn and come to him, his heart is for us. And Pilate starts realizing that Jesus is not an imminent threat to Rome. The kingdom that Jesus had is not a kingdom that's going to overtake, that's going to overthrow Rome. It's a kingdom that's going to happen elsewhere and in other ways. And he certainly realized that Jesus is not a criminal, that Jesus was not guilty of anything that warranted the punishment that the Jewish leadership was calling for. So yeah, Jesus lets Pilate know that his kingdom is not of this world. And Jesus is like, and I'm here for truth. If you're on the side of truth, you're on the side of me. And at that point, an exasperated Pilate just says, what is truth? And he walks out. And he's like, okay, we have this thing we do on Passover. Well, I will release to you Jewish people one of your Jewish prisoners that we're holding. We have here the king of the Jews. We have over here Barabbas, who was actually guilty. We talked about Barabbas. He was an insurrectionist. He'd actually killed people. And he was guilty of all the things that they were trying to pin on Jesus. It's like, I'll give you one of these guys. Which one do you want? And he's thinking for sure they're going to take the king of the Jews, the innocent guy, and let him go. But they didn't. They said, give us Barabbas. And we were talking on the way home. They hear Barabbas, the guilty, going free at the expense of Jesus. And that sounded a little bit familiar. Here's me, guilty, being able to go free at the expense of Jesus, even now. This is like a foretaste of what Jesus was going to do on the cross and what Jesus would continue to do for like 2,000 years down the road for scumbags like me, that, I get to go free and be free at his expense. We were talking on the way home. Alana's like, I wonder what Barabbas did. We don't talk about him anymore. We don't hear from him anymore in this story. And here we have Barabbas going free. And we're like, what did he do? And I'm like, I don't know what Barabbas did. What did he do with his freedom? Did he go right back like a dog to his vomit? Sorry, I don't want to ruin. Well, I'm going to ruin your lunch anyway with what we're going to be talking about today. But dogs are like, and it's like, oh, hey, that looks pretty good. I think I'll have that again. And with our sin, we kind of do that. It's like, ooh, that's gross, but I think I'll go back and get some more, right? And did he do that? I don't know. Did it change him? Don't know what happened to Barabbas. What happened to us when we go free? That's something we have control and knowledge over. What do we do with our freedom when Jesus sets us free? So we'll leave you thinking about that a little bit. The next couple of weeks are going to be pretty violent and difficult subject matter. I'm not going to overdo it. I used to do that. I remember when I had youth group kids, and it was Easter, and I got these big metal spikes. I'm like, happy Easter, everybody. This is what Jesus went through. And, you get that. If you get that spike at the tip and you push it right in here, you can find your median nerve and it's going to hurt. And that just drove right through that and caused all kinds of pain and they're like, oh, thanks, happy Easter. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to try and overdo it. But we're going to engage this squarely like we do with things in the Bible that are difficult. I love that all this is written in. It's not like brush off to the side and not talked about. It's not all Pollyanna, but this stuff is brought up as part of the account. So, we won't overdo it, but we're going to go through it. We're going to face it squarely. We're going to keep an eye toward resurrection and hope. Death of Jesus was not the end-all, be-all. That was not the whole purpose. It was a stepping stone toward resurrection, toward life, toward salvation. So we got to keep an eye to that when we're going through this, that there was a purpose for it, that it was for us, and the good things came out of it. The Bible is tough that way sometimes when you study it as it's written. I heard there was a pastor once in Sacramento that had a radio thing, and I used to listen to him. I forget who it was now, but he actually took on the Song of Solomon. And I don't know if you're familiar with that. Maybe, oh boy, that would be fun. We will all be blushing. I remember not specifically, but he was talking about, it's the beloved looking at his bride, and he just thinks she's hot. And all her breasts are like fawns. Oh, PG-13 warning, I'm sorry. It's in the Bible. He's breaking that down. I'm like, that's kind of weird. But, in that Hebrew culture, he broke it down to where that actually kind of made sense to what was being said. But it was like, ooh, I can imagine his whole congregation sitting there going, yeah, TMI. Can we just study something else? But, we take it, we engage it squarely, we teach it, we learn it. So we're going to start in John 19 today, starting in verse 1. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. This is difficult, isn't it? This is rough. I'm glad it's there. So Pilate had Jesus flogged, or scourged if you have a King James. King James uses some more powerful words sometimes. Scourged. That sounds more like what it was. The Romans, they did flog their prisoners prior to crucifixion. They had 3 reasons for doing this. There were 3 objectives to the flogging, the scourging. It was to intensify the punishment. And this was punishment. This is not discipline. There's a difference between punishment and discipline. When I was a kid, I hung out with this guy named Robert Dubsky, who's still around, and that guy got me in some trouble. It was right after we moved up here from the Bay Area. Robert Dubsky, that dude was, he grew up to be a correctional officer. I think he's retired from the system now. Isn't it funny how these squirreliest, most lawless little kids grow up to be cops and correctional officers? Oh, he got me in trouble. We're going over to his house from my house one day. Because it was the old school, it's like Sugar Pine in the 70s. So, he'd run all the way up to my house and get me, and we go back to his house. We're back and forth all summer. And we went down, and there was this house where this girl named Pilar lived, Pilar Barton. I still remember the name. And her and her family had a swing set. He's like, come here, let's do this. So we climb up, and we unhook the swing set, the swings from the swing set, just leave them on the ground. I'm like, all right, I'm just, okay. And then we get down to his house. By the time we got there, Pilar's mom had called Robert's mom, because this was, Sugar Pine in the 70s. Had called Robert's mom and said, Robert and Dwayne just did this thing. Could you send them back up here? And so she sent us back up, and they made us hang the swings back up while they were watching and apologize. That was discipline. I was like, look, you did a really mean, stupid, dumb thing. You're going to come here and you're going to fix that. You're going to make it right, and you're going to apologize. That was discipline. We didn't go up there. They didn't beat us, right? They didn't clock us in the head with a baseball bat or something, and that's punishment. There's a difference between discipline and punishment. Flogging, the scourging, was part of the punishment. There's no reformation going on here. This is on the way to capital punishment. So it's to intensify the punishment. It increased the intensity of suffering for the condemned and for any passersby. Anybody who was in the neighborhood walking by, this is not a very pleasant thing to come on, to hear happening, to see happening. They wanted to make an example out of each one. This is how Rome, we talked about how they expanded their empire, and it was like 1.6 million square miles at the peak, and the way they maintained that was through military force and brutality. People were scared to rise up against them because this is what would happen. They wanted to make an example out of people. It's like, you raise up against us, this is going to be you, don't do it. And so they wanted to intensify the pain for the condemned and make an example out of every person. The scourging also made the crucifixion more bloody and violent in appearance. When you just crucify somebody, there's not as much blood. When you scourge them, now you put them on the cross and blood is everywhere. It just makes it more graphic visually, where people are like, ew. No, I don't want to do that. This is not on my list of things to do today. Hanging on the cross and the blood everywhere, no. So they were all about the shock and awe. And it also helped to maximize the suffering on the cross. What's worse than being crucified and struggling for breath, hanging on a cross, waiting to die, hanging on a wooden pole with no skin left on your back? That's, so it's maximize the suffering as well. So it's to intensify the punishment. Number 2 reason they did it was to get confessions, like the mob, right? It's like an interrogation thing. Sit somebody down in a dark room with a single light over. I'm going to bring in Jimmy the fish. And Jimmy's going to make you talk. He's going to cut your fingers off one at a time until you rat out your buddies, It's to make him confess. And I'll get into that in a minute. So it was to make them confess to their crimes, to rat out, turn other people over. It was a way to get information out of them. And the third reason was to weaken the condemned person so that they would die faster on the cross. They're all about brutality. Brutality is key, but they needed also kind of an efficiency to manage cross traffic, right? You don't want too many people hanging out there. You gotta, what's it? My wife is like, oh, you did not just say that. You have them hanging on there dying, and that's one thing, and then they would die and they would leave them there after they were dead. So you need a good mix of, dead and dying up there just to deter people from raising up against Rome. So this was a brutal, this flogging, this scourging was a brutal punishment by itself, and it was often fatal. Guys didn't always survive this part of it. The Romans were great. They were expert. They came up with ways to inflict pain like nobody had ever seen before. And they had this perfect tool that they started with, and this scourging. It was a kind of a cat of nine tails apparatus, a handle with braided strands hanging out of it. And they would weave into that pieces of lead. It's like, when you go fishing and you want to cast out into the lake, if you just cast your hook, it goes about 2 feet and falls in the water. You put, lead shot on the end of it. Whew, now you got some weight. It's going to zing out there, so they would weave lead into it to give it some weight, so it would come with more force. Then they would weave pieces of bone and broken glass, whatever scrap stuff they could find that was sharp. And that's what they would use. And now 40 lashes, if they gave 40 was the number of judgment, 39 was the number of mercy. So they figured that by giving 39 instead of 40, they were tempering judgment with mercy. So they would give them 39 lashes with this. to be merciful. Ooh, that's much better. 39 instead of 40. Now, if the condemned person, this is what I was going to get into before, but I want to wait until now, until we had kind of the visual on all that. If the condemned person confessed a crime after each application of the whip, after each stripe, then the next application would come with decreased force. So you keep confessing, well, now it's going to be a little softer each time. And Jesus didn't have any crimes to confess. So, and even at 39 stripes, many people didn't live through the scourging. There was a lot of blood loss, would expose bones, muscle. Sometimes you could even see the internal organs, just gross. And nobody want to see that. Aren't you glad we don't do this here in our country? I mean, for all our faults, we don't crucify people, we don't scourge people. We're getting better at the whole human rights thing. I would like to think that we're moving in a positive direction, and I'm glad we don't do this. And then when you look back, and I might read it at the end if I have time, Isaiah 53, you read that, and it's all this being revealed to Isaiah like 800 years before it happened. And they had to be looking at that going, that's kind of weird. It sounds, like some kind of military thing, a military leader being sacrificed. I'm sure they had no idea what it was talking about, but here it becomes very clear. And a lot of the things that happen here with Jesus are foretold 800 years before. By his stripes we are healed. And I was hoping Don would be here today, because Striper, Isaiah 53:5, by his stripes we are healed. That was their logo. And I might be the only one here who ever listened to Striper back in the 80s. So Pilate, his hope was that by having Jesus flogged, by having him scourged in this way, that he could bring him out, knowing that he was innocent, that the crowd might have a little compassion on him. They might see him and go, man, it's enough. We'll just let him go. Pilate really wanted him to go. He wanted to turn him loose. And then it said that the soldiers put a crown of thorns on him, put a purple robe on him, purple being the color of royalty. And it was very expensive. That had to be an expensive gag to pull on Jesus. Why did they go the extra mile? I mean, this is humiliating. They're already inflicting incredible pain on him, and now they're humiliating him. It just seems like insult to injury. And most of these soldiers in Rome, or in the area of Jerusalem, were Roman soldiers that were recruited, that were enlisted out of Syria, which was, Syrians and the Jews did not get along. I think they still don't get along really well. So there was like this pre-existing beef with the Jews, and here these Syrian soldiers have this guy, oh, King of the Jews, hail King of the Jews. Is this the best they can do? This carpenter, yeah, we'll give him a crown, we'll give him a scepter, we'll give him, said they handed him a reed for a scepter and put the purple robe on him as they were beating him, and after he'd been scourged. What a spectacle. And it's just humiliating at that point. There's a powerful thing that happens with people in groups. And we're going to see a couple examples as we go through this chapter of it. There's a powerful thing that happens with people in groups. It can be for good, or it can be for bad. Good examples. Concerts. Oh, you get everybody coming together that likes a certain band, and we're going to buy our tickets, and we're going to go, and it's going to be fun. We're going to get the whole experience. And, you get people together and something like that. That's a good thing. Weddings and funerals, right? You get people together, friends and family. And, at a wedding, you're upholding, you're signing off like, yes, we're so glad this couple's getting married. We're going to send them on to the rest of their life. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a party. And in funerals, we gather around to send somebody off, right? To say goodbye and to support the family that's left. These are good things when people gather. And it's interesting that these are the things that have been taken away from us in this whole time of COVID. Those are the good things. And then there are bad examples. Bullying, henpecking. That whole word henpecking, if you got a runt in the chicken coop, I guess the chickens will peck at it and peck at it and peck at it. They'll gang up on it and peck at it till it's dead. And people, unregenerate people with evil in their hearts, will sometimes act much the same way. bullying, rioting, looting. I don't care who you are, that's wrong. Like breaking other people's stuff, stealing other people's stuff, ruining other people's stuff. There's no reason for it. It's bad. And you get these people together in a group, and they get emboldened, and they get all whipped up emotionally, and it just like escalates. People are kind of like meat bees sometimes when you put them together in a group. We found out we have a meat bee nest under our back porch, and Helena was out washing our dog, and they didn't like that. And if you get them agitated, they give off these little pheromones that'll like send messages to all the other meat bees in the area that, hey, we're going to attack something. And they went after the dog and chased them in the house. People act like that sometimes. The power of people in groups, for good, for bad, and the good things have been taken away, and here we have these kind of negative things. We see them on the news all the time, and it's so sad. So we're going to see a couple examples of this mob mentality. I think that may have been part of what was happening to Jesus. You get these guys, these enemies, people who have a beef with the Jews, who have a Jew that they're going to scourge, and they just go a little overboard with it. They start getting carried away. And I think it was Spurgeon, I didn't write it down, that said that, boy, if we could be as creative with how we serve our God as these guys were in humiliating Jesus, let us be so diligent and creative in how we worship him and lift him up. And, as these guys were when they were tearing him down. So there's this mob mentality. And again, we're going to see it in a couple of places here. Going on in verse 4, once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." So Pilate again, no basis for the charges against Jesus. He doesn't see any reason that Jesus should die. He says, "I'm going to bring him out." And here he is, behold the man. He comes out, Jesus comes out, and he must have been looking rough by this point. The merciful 39 lashes with nothing to confess, so it was like full force all the way through. The crown of thorns, the thorns on these things in the Middle East are not like rose bushes. They're, crazy thorns. And then I assume they put the robe on after the fact, so that was now, probably soaked with blood. He was spat on, beat up, bleeding, looking pretty rough, and a pitiful sight. And like Pilate's, man, I hope this will do it. I hope they'll just let him go now. So he parades him out there, says, "Here is the man. Behold," we've seen this word before, "Ido." Behold, which is not just to see something. It's like, oh yeah, I saw that, but it's to see something. It's like when you explain something to somebody and they go, "I see." It's to see with understanding, to see with intent, to study and know. And so the original language is behold the man, which ironically kind of parallels a passage in 1 Samuel chapter 9, where God reveals Israel's first king, Saul, to Samuel. It says in 1 Samuel 9, 16 to 17, "About this time tomorrow I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin, anoint him ruler over my people. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for their cry has reached me." When Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, "This is the man I spoke to you about. Behold the man." Isn't that original language again? "Behold the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people." Now, Israel was never supposed to have a king. They had judges back in those days, and they're looking around at the neighboring kingdoms and like, "We want a king. They got a king. Can we have a king?" Well, you're not supposed to have a king. You got these judges that are your military leaders. They're going to keep you in line when you step out of line. You don't really need a king. King's like kind of too much power for a person to handle. A lot of corruption can happen when you're king. We've been looking at the old English kings from the Middle Ages and stuff, and man, these guys were something, the Victorian era. A lot of corruption can happen with a lot of power, and they weren't ever supposed to have a king. Sometimes God will give us something we want, even though we shouldn't have it. He's like, "All right, you guys want a king? Behold the man. Behold your king." And Saul started off well, did not end very well if you read the story. So here we have the only king Israel should have ever had, Jesus, being rejected. It's interesting that the verbiage is kind of the same. Behold the man. Look at him, study him, understand what's going on here. Look at him and consider him. Verse 6. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify." But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." So, as soon as they brought him out, and Pilate's hoping, man, I hope this is kind of a sad, pitiful sight. I hope they'll have a little mercy on him. And here's the mob mentality whipping up again. The Jewish leaders are like, "Crucify, crucify." They're whipping up the crowd to not have mercy on Jesus. And Pilate said, "No, you take him and crucify him. I find no basis for a charge against him." "Pilate, you crucify." "Oh, wait, you can't." Because remember that the power of capital punishment had been taken away from the Jews by the Romans. So they needed Pilate to make that happen. He's like, "You take him and crucify him." "Oh, wait, no, you can't do that. I think he's innocent. You guys should let him go," is what Pilate's saying. And Pilate here is trying to assert his authority. And there's like so many levels of political yuck that we're going to see as we go through this too. He's trying to assert his authority in kind of a peeing contest, so they say in the coarse vernacular of our culture, with the Jewish leadership. And then the Jewish leaders finally exposed what their real problem with Jesus was. They accused him of violating their law by claiming to be the Son of God. The problem was that Pilate in Rome didn't give a rip about their religious rules, did not give a rip about their laws, their culture, their leadership. They just didn't care. They just wanted to keep them quiet and rule over them and have them be good little subjects. So they really didn't care. So there's zero chance that he moved to crucify Jesus based on this. And then, check out Pilate's response in verse 8. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. And he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus, but Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have the power either to free you or crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." So that Pilate was more afraid, meaning that he was already experiencing some fear. This is the Greek word phobeo. Struck with fear, alarmed, scared, and sent running. Have you guys seen it? They'll start surfacing about now on social media, those pictures of like haunted house pictures where something will happen and they'll take a picture at the moment something happens in the haunted house and people are like, phobeo. Everything in you is like, whoa, that scares me. I want to run away. And you can see it all over people's faces. It's hilarious. Some of them, you get these big grown men, big old boys that are just like they're going to wet themselves. Like, but don't know what's happening, but it's scary. It's bad. Phobeo. So Pilate was kind of struck with this fear. He had a little bit of this going in, and then when this happened, he had even more. He was even more afraid, it says. And it could be, and it doesn't say why, but all of a sudden, we find out that Pilate has a certain level of fear. And it could be that he was taking the word of Jesus more seriously than the Jewish leadership did. He could have been like, believing that there was something to this Jesus guy. He spent a little time with him. Didn't take him long to realize that he's not a threat. And in fact, to spend time with Jesus, people realized there was something actually very different about him than other messiahs or insurrectionists or deliverers of Israel. Or maybe he was just a victim of his own superstitions. This talk about being the Son of God, the Romans had these had their Roman gods, and you don't want to tick those guys off. And well, this guy is actually a son of some god from somewhere. We don't want to make him, we don't want to do anything bad to him. It could make the gods mad. So it could have been a superstitious thing as well. We don't know for sure. But either way, he had a degree of fear before, and now he's got an increased degree of fear. And he says, "Where do you come from, man?" And Jesus gives him no answer, because we've kind of been over that already. Jesus is like, my kingdom is not of this world. So, Jesus is not of this world. He says, "Don't you know I can set you free or crucify you?" And Jesus says, you would have no power if it wasn't given to you from above. So Jesus is now kind of undermining Pilate. Pilate's having a rough day. What's happening, you can kind of see it coming up, that Pilate is getting pushed back on his heels. And I've heard that he wasn't a great leader, that the way he took a lesson from Rome and maintained his rule by brutality. And here, when he gets involved with the politics, he's getting pushed back on his heels a little bit. He's losing his footing. Verse 12. I want to talk about that greater sin, too. This is where my notes kind of run out, so I'm going to be winging it here. Jesus said, you would have no power over me if we're not given to you, in verse 11, from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. Why? Who's that? Was it Judas? Was it Caiaphas? It's vague, and it's that way on purpose. But why was their sin greater than Pilate? Pilate didn't know Jesus from anybody. And he just knew he was innocent. He was trying to set him free. We know in retrospect, because we know the history, that they did get the guilty verdict. But the ones that brought him were people that Jesus, whether it was Judas, whether it was Caiaphas, these were people that knew what Jesus was doing, who knew what he was about, who knew he never did anything except help people. He never did anything except love people, heal people, bring good into hard situations. They knew better. And when you know better, now there's a level of responsibility. We're responsible for what we know. We're kind of out of time, so we're just going to stop here. I told my wife, I said, I don't know if we're going to get through this today. We might just stop cold. I do want to read Isaiah 53 to you. It'll only take a minute. 800 years before, check this out. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom the people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Striper. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each one of us has turned our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, and he did not open his mouth. Oh, see, we just saw that. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he had suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors, for he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. Isn't that something? Like 800 years before, and as we study this, you can kind of see where it's all kind of coming down. So yes, it's brutal, it's violent, but it's a part of history, and we got to remember our history. We shouldn't try to erase history. There's a trend of where people are like trying to write stuff out of U.S. history that was ugly, and we've had some ugly things in our history, and I think we need to leave those things in there so we don't forget the lessons that we have to learn from history. I'm glad this stuff is there. I don't ever want to go back to a time when we're scourging and crucifying people. I don't care who you are, what you've done, just the dignity of being a human made in the image of God. You deserve better than that, I think. There's some crimes where it's like, yep, I'll use the whip. But realistically, as a Christian looking through the eyes of Jesus, we need to learn from these lessons. I'm glad we're not Rome anymore. So I'm glad it's here. We're going to learn the lessons. We'll continue next week. It's going to be a rough couple of weeks I'm going to ruin everybody's lunch a couple times. But this is what it is. We're going to engage it squarely. We're going to learn from it. We're going to keep an eye on a few days later when Jesus is resurrected, when he lives, and when he has overcome death and he's overcome hell on our behalf. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you again for this day, for this time. And we just pray for understanding as we go through these difficult, kind of gruesome, ugly parts of the story. We are so thankful that we live in a place where we don't do this anymore. And we pray that the rest of the world, there are places where bad things still happen. And we just pray that they would learn this mercy as well. And that people, by their very nature, have a dignity of being made in your image. And even the worst of the worst, we should treat them as such, Lord. And Lord, we just thank you for what was done on our behalf as we go through Isaiah and 53 and see what was said there like hundreds of years before. Had to be hard to understand, but as a parent now, we have the hindsight benefit, knowing how it actually came to pass. Lord, we're just so thankful for what was done on our behalf. And that you set us free. And Lord, as we're set free like Barabbas was set free, help us to do the right thing with that, not to go back to what we were, not to go back to things we shouldn't do, but to do the things we should do, to take that forgiveness, that freedom, and march forward in peace and love and to be lights for other people, Lord. We thank you for this day, and as the lights go out tonight, Lord, help us to be lights in our communities. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.